we're gonna do enteral and parenteral feeding. We are going to, the first thing is regular. It's provide privacy, safety, body mechanics, and identify my patient, identify myself, and gather my supplies, which in this case is obviously the feeding, tubing if I need that, um, and well, gloves and the linen saver. Um, well, the first thing before actually gathering my supplies, I'm gonna check the health record because I want to know how much and what I'm gonna give. And something very important to check is for placement with X-ray, which is the definite way to check for placement. I'm also gonna check the type of feeding, the rate that I'm gonna give it, and the frequency for this. And once I have my supplies, I need to make sure that it's not expired, and I shake it well if I need to shake it or mix it. And I'm gonna make sure that it's room temperature, that it's not cold. If it is, then I warm it up, or that it's not hot or anything, just room temperature. And there's a few different ways to do the feeding. We have the open system, which is the bag that we pour the contents in that bag. This bag has to be labeled with the type of feeding, the rate, the name of the patient, my name, um, and yeah, the type and everything. And this is going to be for supply for about 4 to 6 hours. And well, I have to prime the tubing, so I unclamp it. It's previously clamped, so I unclamp it, prime it, make sure that there's no air in the tubing. Same thing with the Toomey syringe. I remove, this is another open system, so I remove the plunger and I fill it up halfway, the Toomey syringe. It's never going to be higher than 18 inches because it's going to go too fast if it's higher. And if I lower it, it's going to go slower, which I might need it, so I control that, but never higher than 18 inches. And those are the two open systems. The closed system is a bottle that's already pre-filled, and the tubing is has a drip chamber like this one. So the drip chamber about halfway, and I also make sure that it's primed. Every time that I give feedings, I'm gonna flush before and after with about 30 mLs of water. Tap water is okay, and maintain the head of the bed elevated about 30 to 45 degrees if the patient can tolerate this. And before I start the feeding, I make sure that the linen saver is placed and I washed my hands and I have gloves on, and that the tubing is primed. And well, once right before I start the feeding, I'm going to check for placement. There's a few ways. One is checking for pH, the gastric content or residual. The pH is 7 to 8, the gastric pH. The patient, if it's an NG tube, for example, they can speak. And also important to check the length of the tubing because it's supposed to be marked. And if that mark is outside, if there's any tubing outside, then it means it's not in the stomach or in the jejunum. So I would make sure that it's placed correctly, again with the pH, checking the length. Now, for the gastric, I can check with 15 mLs of air, instilling with the Toomey syringe, 15 mLs. This is not for the jejunostomy. Um, but if the institution allows it, then I can do that and auscultate the whooshing sound. And then, well, before I start it, the residual, I got to make sure that it's less than 150 mLs or any amount equivalent of 1 hour of the rate that I'm giving. If it's more than this, 150 or 1 hour, I need to notify the physician because that's not normal. Um, and then, well, I flush it, and then I start, once I check placement, flushed it, I start the feeding. One of the ways that I can check, well, once I start it, one of the ways that I can do it is with a pump. So the pump, of course, it's got to be plugged in. It's got to be working. I make sure that turn it on and it works. When I coil the tubing in it, it's going to be off. It's not going to be running, obviously, and it clamped and all that. And I also flush, and I check for placement. And then once everything's done, I set the rate and I turn it on and let it run and make sure, stay there and make sure that it works okay, that it's not leaking or anything. And then we have the open system, which is I control it with the clamps. If I don't have a clamp, then I pinch, and this has got to be the tubing has got to be primed and of course attached, and then I unclamp and let it run to the prescribed amount or time. Um, and we also have the continuous fitting, which I have to flush it with about 50 to 100 mLs every 4 to 6 hours. This has to be flushed continuous. Same thing, the head of the bed is elevated 30 to 45 degrees. And this is for about an hour after the feeding. If the patient can tolerate being up high, sitting for an hour, then that's ideal. So we avoid the reflux or GERD. And so that is for the feeding. Again, I regulate the flow if I control the height until the full amount is given, and then I flush with 30 mLs. And then for medications, I am going to check the health record, the chart, to see what medications I'm going to give. And each one of those, I'm going to make sure they can be crushed. If they can be crushed, then I mix them with 20 mLs of water. And before I give them, I check for residual, the pH, that again is 7 to 8. And each one of these medications will be given separately. And at the end, I'm going to wait for about 30 minutes after all the medications were given. And in between, I flushed with the 20 mLs of water. So at the end, I flush again and I make sure that the patient is okay 30 minutes before I start any feeding if the patient is going to be fed. And that's it. Charted, and that's it.